So, welcome everyone to this very first webinar on leveraging the OGP process to promote information integrity and media freedom. I'm Katharina Zügel, Policy Manager at the Forum on Information and Democracy, and we have the pleasure to host this webinar together with the Open Government Partnership. I will straight away give the floor to our two representatives, namely Alessandro Bellantoni, who's the Director of Policy and Partnerships at the OGP, and then Camille Grenier, who's the Director of the Forum on Information and Democracy, to give you an introduction about today's webinar and our ambitions. Alessandro, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Katerina. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have partnered with the Forum on Information and Democracy on this important issue because we realize that there is not a better time to discuss the importance of independent media and independent journalism than this one. Both the Forum on Information and Democracy and the OGP have worked on these topics for quite some time, but clearly the recent developments and the situation in most of our member countries today bring us to the conclusion that is extremely important to mobilize our communities to increase the amount of attention and hopefully reforms that governments and civil society can push forward in this moment to guarantee the role of media and journalism in democracy. We don't have a lot of time today, so I will cut my intro really short. We will have more time to discuss the topic in details through this webinar. I just wanted to thank the Forum on Information and Democracy for organizing this and all of you for taking part in this conversation, which I hope will lead to action and reforms. But we will have time to discuss this later. Thank you, Kata.
Thank you very much. Camille Grenier, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me all right. Thanks, Katerina. Thank you, Alessandro. It's really great for us as well to be partnering up with the Open Government Partnership on this specific issue that is really dear to our heart, that is media freedom and information integrity. I would first like to begin by thanking you, the OGP, for your leadership in promoting transparency, accountability, and civic participation worldwide. And we're really honored and happy to deepen our collaboration today. I will try to be brief as well, but I just wanted to remind everyone that we've seen in recent years that this fairly new concept of information integrity has gained momentum as a crucial framework for addressing the complexities of our evolving information space. And it really ranges from ensuring media freedom and sustainability of the media to regulating digital platforms, safeguarding personal data. And it really provides a comprehensive, positive approach to countering the challenges of disinformation, polarization, and manipulation. This framework, this notion, is deeply rooted in the principles of the International Partnership for Information and Democracy, an intergovernmental initiative endorsed by 55 countries and implemented by the Forum on Information and Democracy, a civil society organization based in Paris. At the Forum, we have worked extensively to advance this agenda through concrete policy recommendations, the meta-analysis that Professor Robin Mansell will be presenting today as well, and really raising awareness on a sound policy initiative that we have seen in this space. As we today, the stakes could not be higher, as already mentioned. While there is a growing consensus on the fact that the integrity of our information ecosystems is not just an abstract concern, that it is central to the health of our democracy, the geopolitical shifts we are witnessing and the collision in some countries between what some call the big tech and the big state is bringing acute challenges to our shared ideals. This is really why the collaboration between the OGP and the Forum on Information and Democracy is more critical than ever. I will not go into further detail, but we recently published a blog post outlining key areas that include, for example, applying open governance principles to information integrity policies, bridging agendas and communities. And I think this will be crucial, and it's really the aim of these two workshops, to bridge the different stakeholders that are involved in the different processes, and of course collaborate on policy implementations. We know that there is no single solution to the different challenges that we're facing today, but we do hope that by working together, by breaking down the silos, aligning our efforts, and reinforcing democratic governance mechanisms, we can make meaningful progress. And I really look forward to today's discussions and to concrete steps we will take together in the coming month. Thank you so much, Katarina.
Thank you very much, Camille. And as said, today's webinar is the first one of a series to bring together, on the one hand, the community that works since a long time on media freedom and information integrity, and the community that is engaged in the open government process. So that's why today we have some parts of the session focused on providing input on what is the OGP and its process, but also giving insights on what are we actually talking about when we talk about information integrity. And even though we do have a couple of speakers that provide input, we want this webinar to be very interactive. So do please feel free to ask questions either in the chat or raise your hand. There will be a moment for discussion dedicated after each session, but don't hesitate to also ask questions in between. We'll take them on. So first of all, we would like to have a focus on a deep dive into the Open Government Partnership and its process, what it actually is, and how this can be useful to promote information integrity and media freedom reforms. So Alessandro, the floor is yours to present a couple of key elements on the process of the OGP, particularly also for the actors around the table that are coming from the media freedom and information integrity community and that have not been so engaged in this process.
Thank you, Katerina. And exactly as you said, the idea of this workshop is really to underline how the OGP and its processes can be leveraged, can be used to promote reforms in the space of media freedom, journalism, mis and disinformation, information integrity, etc. So let me give a very short summary of what the OGP is and how media freedom and information integrity cuts across many of the areas, the policy areas we focus on, and what kind of opportunities we offer. And then I'll be very, very interested in having a conversation with, especially those of you who don't know the OGP well, or haven't used the OGP so far, on how this platform can become an instrument to promote these principles in public sector reforms. So I need to be allowed to share my screen, Kata. Thank you very much. So here it is. Let's see if it works. Great, wonderful. Thank you, Kata. So here we are. Well, as hopefully many, if not all of you know, the OGP was created now almost 15 years ago by 8 governments in 2011. Seems like a different era where there was a strong international consensus around the fact that governments, by implementing the principles of transparency, participation, accountability, integrity, could become more open and participatory by and allowing citizens and civil society to co-create policies and services. As our former now CEO, Sanjay Pradhan, said, by helping fight corruption, improve health, education, ensuring civic participation, open government helps leaders deliver for their citizens between and beyond elections. And this is really important because from the beginning, we wanted to share that the open government principles can have an impact across sectors in every aspect of public policy. They could improve health, education, but clearly also, and that's the focus of today's discussion, the media ecosystem. Since then, we have now more than 70 countries, give or take, that are members of the OGP, 152 local members, which I think now have grown, 400 action plans, 5,000 commitments. It is a movement that is well established and that has created an impressive amount of reforms in all the main areas of good governance. And all these reforms have been co-created with citizens and civil society. As I was saying before, the idea, the vision behind the OGP is that open governments should work in partnership with civil society and people to strengthen democracy and deliver better societal outcomes. So always the double aspect of being good for democracy as a system, but also delivering concrete results to citizens. And our mission as a platform is to connect and enable reformers in government and in civil society to take action together and implement reforms in this field. As I was saying before, our core values are transparency, civic participation, public accountability, and inclusions, which were important when the OGP was created. And also this combination of these four principles together was somehow novel. The idea of open government was somehow novel. They seem to have now taken an entirely different relevance and are worth rediscussing from the perspective of today's context. Now, our model is unique, remains unique. The OGP is the only multi-stakeholder initiative in the world that has this set of characteristics. First of all, we are based on a vibrant community of reformers. And again, every time we talk about reformers, we mean in the public sector and in civil society. We are co-led by these groups of people. To the heart of the OGP, there is a steering committee where half of the members are from civil society and half from the government. But I would say the idea of the OGP was really that of bringing this conversation about public sector reforms inspired by open government principles to the highest level of state. Every 2 years, we have a global summit that always brings together head of states, ministers, and the head of international and national civil society organizations to really discuss what is the state of play and how we can collaborate to improve it. But the heart of the OGP, it's the OGP action plans, which we'll discuss in a second in more detail, so that every member has to implement for 2 or 4 years. And these action plans have had the characteristics of really bridging international principles with domestic practice. And they're all evaluated by an independent reporting mechanism, which ensures the accountability of these reforms that, like this, just don't just remain on paper. The other aspect that is relevant is our whole of state approach, as we would call it. So we are an initiative that is used by all line ministries, I would say, but also independent institutions in the central government, ombudsman offices, etc., but also parliament, justice sector, and increasingly local government at regional and municipal level. As I was saying, this is the process. There is an action plan co-created within something that is called the multi-stakeholder forum, which I will tell you more in a second. That is implemented for 2 or 4 years, is evaluated independently. Everything is published so that it feeds into a monitoring, evaluation, and learning cycle that is supposed to improve the quality of action plans every iteration. The multi-stakeholder forum is the beating heart of the OGP at domestic level. It's a space, an institution that every country sets up where government, reformers, and civil society leaders meet to discuss the reforms that then end up in the national action plan. This really guarantees a balanced, inclusive, and diverse conversation at the domestic level. Sorry. Now, to summarize, more than 5,000 commitments. As you can see, almost 50% of them have been evaluated as ambitious, which is impressive. More than half have been completed, which, if you work in the public sector, know that it's actually very, very good result. And 23% of them have already made significantly better the public administration they have been focused on. These are early results, obviously, because some of these are only being completed recently, and an impact in the public sector takes time, but it's a very encouraging figure. Now, the problem lies, and the reason why we have this event with the forum and the opportunity in front of us, is that if you look at the trending policy areas in the OGP, you will not see media freedom or information integrity. Now, part of this is because we don't really have a tag that talks about it in particular, and there is a little bit of these reforms in the digital governance category, but most of them are, for example, in the freedom of speech category or others that don't appear among the ones that are most used by our community. In fact, if you look at freedom of expression, which is the one I've highlighted, you can see that there are reforms in this area. but not as many as we would like and not as widespread as we would like them to be. So it's an opportunity that we want you to take to use more the OGP to support media freedom and information integrity. There are examples. One is Morocco, and we will talk about it later, so I will not anticipate it to you. Another one, for example, is Mongolia, that is really using the OGP to address a very complex issue, the one around non-disclosure of information on the ground of state secrets, and is also creating a mechanism to engage stakeholders to design a very all-encompassing and comprehensive reform of their media sector. But these are few. There are only few examples that I could mention that could really exemplify the use of the OGP as a platform. Finally, we'll skip to slide, but it's fine. Finally, in order to push for more action in this area, we have launched 2 years ago the Open Government Challenge, which is a challenge that the OGP is doing to itself. The community has agreed to do it to itself, to be more ambitious, to be more impactful, based on an assessment that this was the time to make things serious, even more serious, even more ambitious. Now, this was the list that was created 2 years ago. Obviously, now we would want to add a clear attack and a weakening on democracy that is happening around the world. So even more urgent, this idea of a challenge on open government. As I was saying, the idea is accelerating reform and showcasing impact through ambition. There are 10 areas that we want to focus on. One of them is, as you can see, media freedom, among others. And this is how media freedom is defined in the OGP challenge. Basically, the idea is to develop or reinforce legal frameworks that protect the rights of journalists and independent media. It's a very broad category that can include very different aspects. And as I was saying before, it also does not include, for example, reforms on mis and disinformation online, which would fall under the digital governance category. So media, independent media and information ecosystem are a cross-cutting concept at the OGP, but we have one single standalone category on media freedom, really to show the importance that this topic has for all of us. Countries can participate in the challenge either by creating commitments in their normal OGP action plan and then flagging it to compete for the challenge, or by submitting a standalone action or commitment outside of the action plan, so outside of the 2 or 4 year cycle. This is really to capture any relevant reform that happens in our membership that meets the requirement of the challenge. And the best one will receive an Open Government Award during our forthcoming Global Summit in Spain in October of this year. Through the challenge, we want to give really visibility to the most ambitious reforms in this field, and I hope that you will find this opportunity interesting, but we will also couple it with technical assistance, peer assistance, and possibility of collaboration to help members that want to develop and implement these reforms together with the rest of the OGP community. I'll stop it here, but I'll be very happy to discuss all of this in more details during the question and answer. Thank you, Caterina.
Thank you very much. Maybe 2 very concrete questions before we move on. One comes from the chat, and it's linked to the question, which countries are member of the OGP, and particularly if the US is still a member. So what happens in terms of values of the OGP and countries' membership. And then the second, we do have around the table today quite a lot of NGOs that work on media freedom and information integrity. How can they exactly push for or have an OGP commitment on these topics and promote their reforms and their policy recommendations?
Thank you, Caterina. So the list of members can be found in the link I put on the chat. I'm not going to read you all the 70 plus members, but you will see that they are from Europe, North and South America, Africa, Asia. All regions of the world are represented in the membership. And yes, the United States is still a member of the OGP, and therefore we'll still expect them to collaborate with civil society to develop an action and implement their action plans. And for civil society, the question is really a good one. How can you use the OGP platform? There are basically two ways. One is to become member of the multi-stakeholder forum of your country. And if you need to know who is in charge from civil society of coordinating it together with government, please do get in touch, and I'll be happy to introduce you to the person in charge of it. Or, and this is the novelty of the challenge, you can contact a public institution, or perhaps discuss it with the public institution you're already working with, and you can submit a standalone commitment within the context of the challenge.
Thank you very much. Let's now move on more to the question of what is actually information integrity and media freedom, and what are we talking about? What are the current trends? For that, we would first like to give the floor to Robin Mansell, who is the Scientific Director of the Observatory in Information and Democracy, which is a meta-analysis that was conducted by the Forum on Information and Democracy, and it takes a state-of-the-art of how our global information space is actually changing and what are the key challenges. It assembled more than 3,000 resources from around the world, from the Global South and the Global North countries, even though there's a bit of a research gap in the Global South. Robin, the floor is you to give an idea of where we're standing with the current global information space, and I will share the
Thank you, and hello everyone. I'll just wait for the slides to show. So this was our report, and it was published in January, and the slide shows you the key areas which we addressed, and in the short time available today, I clearly cannot cover all of them. I would just draw your attention to the fact that in addition to the big report, there are several smaller ones. So if you go to the website, you will be able to access smaller summaries of what's in the report. Next. So if we think about information integrity and information ecosystems, which were at the core of our work over, excuse me, 15 months, we used the UN Global Digital Compact definition of information integrity as access to relevant, reliable, and accurate information and knowledge. And this is important in inclusive, open, safe, and secure digital spaces. When it came to thinking about how to define information ecosystems, we used a definition which has several characteristics which are a little different than some of the literature. So we emphasized people, practices, values, and technologies with complex interdependent components involving power relations between multiple actors. And the difference between this definition and some definitions which you will find in the literature is that we didn't start with technology. We really started with people and institutions and practices. And we were very concerned with research that identifies how power relationships between different stakeholders, and particularly between big tech companies and governments and civil society actors and citizens, are changing. And then we asked ourselves, what is a healthy information ecosystem? And I think there are many who might agree that ideally it should be a balanced and well-functioning system. But here we run into issues because it is not always clear what that means when we start talking about mis and disinformation. Then we find that there is much less consensus in the academic literature, certainly, but also in policy circles about just exactly what is mis and disinformation and how should it be dealt with. Next, please. The overall message coming from our work over an extended period of time is really that mis and disinformation is only one troubling factor for democracy. And I think that is echoed by the preceding speaker. Societies are facing many crises. And although mis and disinformation is often a symptom of changes in societies, and it often amplifies those changes, we argued quite strongly in our report that it is just one factor and that we need multiple strategies to try to understand why mis and disinformation are created and who is affected by it. Next slide, please. Given your interest in news, I thought I would briefly highlight just some of the work that is in our report. We did a meta-analysis, which means that we didn't generate our own research, but I think it's very interesting to remember that when we think about trust in news media, whether commercial or independent media, the experience is different across countries, across the world. I'm not going to read out to you all of these different statistics, but we see huge variations in terms of whether people are selectively avoiding the news and why. We see big variations across countries in the global south and in the global north about what people believe to be real and what they believe to be fake or mis and disinformation. And furthermore, in terms of whether or not they have the competencies and skills or are confident that they can actually tell a difference between inaccurate information and accurate information. What we also see big differences in are the shifts from people who mainly still focus on legacy news media and those who have shifted, particularly younger generations, almost entirely to online news, if they participate at all. And we also see very big differences in whether or not there are partisan actors who are involved in generating content and influencers. The experience across countries, again, according to the literature, is very uneven. And finally, the role of mis and disinformation in political polarization, which receives an enormous amount of attention given the numbers of elections that are being held and interventions by internal and external actors. This also depends in the research literature on multiple factors. One in particular is whether or not people already have identified with particular politics, parties, ideologies, and how this influences the way they engage with mis and disinformation. Next slide, please. In terms of combating and measuring mis and disinformation and how it is integrated within the news ecology or the media ecology, it is extraordinarily difficult to measure the prevalence of mis and disinformation. There are enormous variations in the claims about how significant a problem is. There are some scholars who argue it's not that big of an issue because a relatively small number of people are actually exposed to that information. On the other hand, others claim it is a very, very big problem, but the metrics available are only at the very beginnings of being developed. And this is only partly because of problems of access to commercially sensitive digital platform data. What we find about global comparisons in the literature is that they often lack context. And by context, I mean the social, the political, cultural conditions that exist in a particular place have an enormous bearing on whether or not and how mis and disinformation is implicated in the way in which people respond to it. And one of the largest deficits in terms of research is on actors' motivations to actually weaponize information. We have a lot of research on effects and impact, but not so much on the motivations, and this is a core area, I think, for research in the future. When it comes to content moderation effects, which particularly in the last month have become very topical with Meta's announcement that it is going to change its reliance on independent fact checkers, for example. The effects of different strategies for content moderation also vary across different countries. And one of the key issues is the independence of fact checkers, individuals and/or organizations around the world, in contrast to the privatized censorship, if you want to call it that, which is carried out by the big tech companies when they are not held to account by government policies. And finally, coming to political polarization again and elections, we find that the results of research in this area are ambiguous, to say the best, to put it mildly. We find studies which unfortunately relied disproportionately on evidence from the United States and some European countries. But when we try to think globally about what the issues are in terms of mis and disinformation and its impact on elections and their outcomes, it is a very difficult field to make sense of. Next, please. I thought I would very briefly mention AI because AI is very topical and there's an enormous investment being poured into innovations in AI systems. And many of these tools are being used to attempt to combat the harms that are associated with mis and disinformation. What we conclude in our report is that there is no AI tool which can be entirely free of bias. And this has implications for the ways in which AI tools are applied in order to try to moderate content that appears online in the news media and more generally. And the big message coming out of our analysis was that content moderators must be accountable to some authorities, whether they be civil society or they be governments, and that this removes the full responsibility away from the big tech companies. And also that fact-checking on its own cannot really be an answer, the whole answer to combating the harms of mis and disinformation. We also look quite in depth at the way AI is being used in newsrooms, where we found that there are many examples of where the application of new tools is contributing to content diversity in a way that is very healthy and conducive to information integrity. But we also found a lot of inconclusive evidence on the claims about the efficiency and the productivity of the use of these tools. This is particularly true for smaller news organizations, where although you can use generative AI online relatively cheaply these days, there are all sorts of hidden costs which prevent many smaller organizations from benefiting to the extent that they might be able to. And finally, even though AI tools are being used to a greater extent, they rely on commercial data monetization, the commercialization of data. And that is the principal driver of news personalization. And it is also the biggest threat when it comes to thinking about the future and the independence of the news ecology. Next, please. So finally, I just wanted to mention a few of the policy responses which seem to be able to be drawn out of our analysis. Our analysis as a meta-analysis was not actually designed to come up with policy recommendations. Nevertheless, if we needed to single out the major issue that needs to be addressed by policy in order to secure information integrity in the future, it is to tackle the asymmetrical power of big tech companies as against individuals and also social and political groups. Following on from that, when regions and countries around the world establish regulations and new codes that are meant to strengthen information integrity and the transparency and accountability of the platform operators, the key is to enforce those regulations. We find lots of evidence of weak enforcement in countries around the world, but also to do so in a way that upholds human rights commitments, whether those be to privacy or to freedom of expression. In specific relation to the news media, conclusion that we highlighted very strongly is the need to find ways to strengthen the bargaining power of news organizations against big technology companies. We have so many instances across the world of both smaller news organizations finding themselves in a very precarious position, but also of the larger news organizations finding themselves in positions where they need to consolidate, which then has impacts on the plurality and diversity of the news environment and on information integrity. Many governments are adopting policies and strategies and legislation to tackle illegal and/or harmful mis and disinformation. But quite often what we found was that these were happening in silos, that they were not well coordinated, and that sometimes there was too much reliance, for example, simply on fact-checking and not on a number of other strategies that can be used to tackle this kind of information. And then finally, we emphasized the need for increasing investment in media and information literacy, but also AI literacy. And here we emphasize particularly the fact that what is needed is not just technical skills, but a much more holistic approach to enabling people to develop the capacity to critically evaluate the information they encounter. And we stressed particularly that this is something which is neglected some of the time, that people actually do have agency, that they interpret information that they encounter online in very, very different ways. And this is something which can be better understood and discussed when you start enhancing people's literacy skills. So that is a very short introduction to a very big report. I encourage you to have a look at it because it has a number of signposts and directions in it towards practical and more general responses to deal with the very difficult issues of strengthening information integrity in democracies across the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robin, and thank you for this very insightful report. The idea really is with this presentation to give you, on the one hand, a sense of the complexities of the issue, but also some ideas of what kind of commitments could maybe find their way into the OGP process. While Robin focused very much on the question of information integrity at large, we would also like to take a deep dive into the questions of media freedom and the situation of media liberty. So I have the pleasure to pass the floor to Jordan Ork, who's international officer at Ofcom, the UK's media regulator, to give us a sense of where we're standing with media freedom and particularly public service media in the UK, and also give some ideas of what reforms could look like to ensure media freedom in the UK and in other countries. The floor is yours, Jordan.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for inviting Ofcom to take part in today's discussion. A quick word of introduction to start. Ofcom is the UK's communications regulator. We're independent of government, and our work covers a range of areas that includes online safety and telecoms, and perhaps most importantly for this forum, broadcast media. We work to ensure that audiences in the UK have access to media they can trust and value, and part of our mission is to support an operating environment through regulation which enables media freedom, pluralism and diversity. Now, we do that in a variety of ways, for example, administering broadcast licenses to ensure that audio and audiovisual services are held to strong common standards and that audiences are protected from harms when consuming content, and by working to ensure that people can have trust in the news they watch and listen to, that it is accurate and impartial and provided by a choice of outlets. The reason why? Well, as we've heard from the other speakers today, because a free, plural and trusted media is a central pillar in the functioning of democratic society, no matter where in the world you happen to be based. Now, key to that, from our perspective, is public service media, part of the information ecosystem which our research shows is particularly valued by UK audiences as a source of trusted and accurate news and information. The UK's public service broadcasters, BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and Channel 5 are central to the delivery of public service media content that is universally available and free at the point of use. But audiences here also benefit from public service media content made and shared by high quality commercial sources such as here in the UK Sky News and many local providers that serve communities in, for example, the devolved nations. I'm in Scotland, for example, in Edinburgh, where we have a range of commercial media services that provide useful local information. Now, echoing back to Robin's presentation on the forum's excellent reports, I wanted to highlight how it rightly notes that independent public service media can be a vital component of a healthy information ecosystem. We can see similar thinking too in recommendations made by the Council of Europe on promoting a favourable environment for quality journalism in the digital age. And I say that to set up what I am about to focus on, and that is the interim findings of Ofcom's review into public service media in the UK. Now, while those findings are UK focused, they very much speak to issues facing public service media providers across the world. from audience loss to digital platforms and resulting questions around sustainability and reach, to rising public disengagement with news and traditionally trusted sources of information. So I very much think and hope these findings are useful to consider as a case study, while we as a community of individuals and organisations that are trying to find solutions to issues that are common to us all across borders. Now, our findings provide an assessment of the performance of UK public service media over the past 5 years, how well the sector is meeting audience needs, and the key challenges and opportunities it's facing. And we carry that assessment out as a core part of our regulatory work. Our findings were published in December last year, and they are informed by our own research, by third-party market and audience research, by direct consultation with public service media providers, and by policy responses that are being developed in other jurisdictions. And the headline point I wish to make first is that the public service broadcasters and public service media more broadly is delivering well for UK audiences in challenging times, but reaching everyone is more complicated than it has ever been before, as ongoing tech disruption and fierce competition for audiences from digital platforms intensifies the pressure they face. Now, when it comes to providing high quality and accurate news, our review notes 4 key challenges, which I think will be useful to consider no matter where you are. Threats to the financial sustainability of public service news providers, incurred largely through a loss of advertising revenue to digital platforms, as well as changing audience behaviours and level of trust, present challenges for trusted, duly accurate and duly impartial news provided by public service media providers. That's the first of those 4 challenges. The second is that the significant increase in consumption of news online in the past 2 decades has delivered a range of benefits to users, including greater choice and personalization, but that also presents a range of challenges in relation to discoverability of public interest content, consumption of that content, and attribution of that content to high quality and accurate sources. Number 3, audiences are at greater risk of exposure to misinformation and disinformation when consuming news online. In addition, audiences have told us they have less trust in the accuracy and impartiality of news on social media. And number 4 of our challenges, and specifically linked to that last point, public service broadcasters play an important role in countering the effects of mis and disinformation by facilitating civic understanding and fair and well-informed debate. However, many providers of high quality and accurate news, like those public service broadcasters, find it more challenging to connect with audiences online, particularly due to the challenges previously mentioned. Now, I wish I could finish here with some concrete solutions. Not yet, unfortunately, I have to say. However, at Ofcom, we are now in the process of developing policy responses and remedies that will be designed to counter some of those issues, and we intend to publish those in a follow-up report later this summer. So much more to come, and I'll be very happy to share that at any future update or individually with anyone on the call when it's available. Thank you for allowing me to contribute, and let me know if you'd like any more info.
Thank you very much, Jordan. We have one very complex question in the chat, and maybe I'm addressing it to several of you. Maybe Jordan, you have some ideas, Robin, but also Camille. There's a question on how can we tackle this power asymmetry between media and big tech in a situation where we have a lot of cuts of funding and donor funding. So how can we support the sustainability of media, but also civil society working in that area in that current situation? Any ideas, Jordan, Robin, Camille, or anyone else around the table? Yes, go ahead.
I would just mention that at least in our report, we have many, many examples of what we called resistance strategies, which are being mounted by civil society organizations to develop alternative media, which is not always good. Sometimes it supports the alt-right, sometimes not. But one of the things that was most interesting was to find out how sustainable those activities are, and how costly they are and who is supporting them. And I agree with the questioner, Susan, that it is increasingly difficult to find funding, but it is not that there is no funding. There are examples, and if we do more work on them, we can learn from those examples and see how they have found funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else would like to give an idea on this very complex question?
Kata, perhaps just to flag that we don't have all the answers, but I put in the chat an article that our own Joe Foti wrote with Cherry from Accountability Lab, one of the co-CEO, on alternative sources of funding for civil society. It's an exploration of many alternatives that can be considered by civil society to compensate for the current situation. So something that people might want to read to get ideas.
Thank you very much. Though I think you might have sent it individually because it's not visible in the overall chat.
Oh, I did.
Jordan, you wanted to react to that as well?
Yeah, just from a regulatory point of view, there's not that many regulators that have access to funding streams and that make funding available to civil society organizations. Some do, particularly for media literacy and digital literacy initiatives. But what I would say is there are several networks of media regulators that operate. So there's EPRA, it's the European Media Regulators Network. There's an equivalent in Latin America and in the Mediterranean. I would say reach out to them, tell them what's happening, share your views with them so that they can disseminate it amongst their networks and try and raise awareness.
Thank you very much. If anyone else has questions, please do feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. But in the meantime, I would like to move on to the next part of the session, which really looks into two concrete examples of how the OGP process has been leveraged. First of all, I would like to say that we will have English-French translation for this part because we have an intervention from Morocco. So for those that want to listen in French, we'll have that part in French. And also, as this is really the beginning of a process, we would like to learn more about what others are doing in this field and how you're combining or how you're using the OGP process to promote information integrity and media freedom. So we have a short survey that my colleague will be sharing with you. We'd be very happy if you can reply to that as quick as possible. It's really, really short to get some insights into some of the good practices that are already existing and to get a sense of how the OGP structure works in different countries. But without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Shushan Doyon, who is the president of the Freedom of Information Center of Armenia, an NGO that is on the one hand involved in the OGP process since a long time, but also works on questions of information integrity to get her insights of how the OGP process could be used to promote media freedom and information integrity. Shushan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It is my great pleasure to join you today for this very timely discussion. I would like to thank you, OGP, and the Forum on Information and Democracy for bringing together a diverse group of people committed to transparency and freedom of expression. To me, media and civil society have never faced so many challenges. A loss of public trust, growing threats to journalists, cutting of the financial means, and the loss of sustainability of the media. And addressing these issues requires a coordinated effort, one that bridges the open government from one side and information integrity communities from the other. This is both a most crucial and most difficult moment also for OGP and the Forum to act together. I'm happy to present Armenian perspective on how we could leverage the OGP processes for ensuring information integrity, hoping that it can serve also as a good example for other countries. For creating strategic responses and building national resilience against information disorder in the post-war and crisis situation for Armenia, the Armenian government adopted a comprehensive concept and action plan for uniting efforts of the government, civil society, and citizens to combat disinformation. This was a year ago. And this comprehensive document, the action plan and the concept were built upon on three main strategic pillars. The first one is strengthening the capabilities of state institutions of Armenia to detect, analyze, and expose this information. Civil society and the government collaborated to integrate key actions of this pillar in the OGP Armenia Action Plan. Among these initiatives was the introduction of the Freedom of Information Self-Assessment System, which was aimed at enhancing transparency, access to information, and greater accountability in the fight against disinformation. The system was developed by our organization, Freedom of Information Center, and was invested in three main public institutions: the Prime Minister Office, the Ministry of Labor, and the Ministry of Economy. This self-assessment tool enables government bodies to self-evaluate the implementation practice of freedom of information and ensure compliance with minimum standards of access to information. The second commitment that also became an integral part of the OGP action plan was investing strategic communication new architecture of the government, aimed at comprehensively reforming the structure and work for communication departments, develop and invest communication protocols, establish a dedicated department within the Prime Minister Office to coordinate government communication at a strategic level and ensure unified, secure, accessible, inclusive, and proactive public communication in the country. Under the second pillar of the concept, it was planned to improve cooperation, engagement, and mobilization of the private sector to tackle disinformation. Through active cooperation with both the government and civil society, the private sector can take over the role of developing initiative and innovative tools to tackle disinformation through artificial intelligence, automated solutions, etc. And finally, under the third pillar of the action plan, it is envisioned to raise awareness and level of education on media freedoms and media literacy. It is planned to implement activities aimed at development of media literacy of every citizen of the society, including, it was planned also to conduct trainings for teachers, capacity building initiatives for public officials, as well as to engage the groups excluded from general education system. What needs to be further done, because this is all that we have planned so far, but of course this is not the final solution for the situation, and there can be planned many initiatives and actions to better and more comprehensively tackle and combat information disorder. I prepared several recommendations for today's event and will be happy to present. First of all, access to information still remains as a golden key to, in my opinion. It's also one of the core values of Open Government Partnership. Without access to reliable information, we can't enjoy all other rights, and the fight against disinformation becoming a house of cards. Governments must fully guarantee the public's right to access accurate, timely, and reliable information. In addition, proper measures should be taken by the governments to ensure proactive access to information and not only the reactive part of the access to information. Number second, media and AI literacy. This has an essential role for equipping both children and adults with the skills to combat harmful information. Nobody argues the necessity of learning mathematics at school. The basic calculation skills we learn at school, and likewise, I think that every child in the school has a right to gain media literacy and AI competencies. As deepfake technology and new forms of digital manipulation evolve because of AI tools, government and civil society should collaborate to integrate fact-checking and AI skills into general education system to empower citizens against manipulative narratives. Number three, public broadcast media I'd attribute a leading role to the public broadcaster in promoting information integrity and open government partnership core values to educate the people by virtue of their objectives and mandate, bringing high quality educational and insightful content to help people obtain fact-based, verified, and reliable information. Number 4, transparency of the media ownership. This is another key area where OGP has done tremendous work so far. People has limited information who owns the media and what ownership chain exists in media environment. Transparency in the media enables people to use information to better understand the different influencers on the production, collection, and dissemination of the content. The OGP has played a crucial role in supporting Armenia's reform on beneficial ownership transparency, including in the media sector. Through OGP's multi-stakeholder approach, Armenia was able to introduce an economy-wide holistic reform as a part of the government's efforts to combat corruption. The government has included a commitment in the Open Government Partnership 4th National Action Plan to ensure beneficial ownership transparency of all business sectors, including the media. Through OGP co-creation process, civil society organizations, journalists, and government agencies work together to develop a legal framework requiring media companies to disclose their true owners. This ensured broad participation and public trust in the reform, and Armenia became one of the pioneering countries investing beneficial ownership reform in all sectors of the business, including the media sector. Number 5, the next key area which needs our urgent and collaborative effort is financial instability of the media, especially in light of the sudden freeze of US aid funding. This has sent shockwaves through independent newsrooms across the world. Many smaller outlets even face closure. Larger ones stay for financial strain. In the meantime, the decline in independent news outlets will lead to an increase in disinformation, as the reliable sources for information will be decreased. Moreover, autocratic leaders in some countries may seize the moment to tighten the media control. We should join and mobilize our efforts to find quick and viable solutions, including engaging European institutions and private donors to fill the sudden gap and prevent long-term damage to media pluralism. And finally, it is more than obvious that no single action can address so many current challenges. Government, civil society, media, private sector, and technology platforms also must work together to co-create solutions that ensure independent and transparent media ecosystem. The OGP and Forum on Information and Democracy may closely work with the governments for creating a more favorable environment for the media and civil society by launching diversified incentives to ensure financial sustainability and providing technical assistance in this new reality. And only through collaboration, we can ensure that governments uphold their commitments to transparency, independence, media, and access to information. I appreciate your time and attention and will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And as I know that you will have to leave us in a moment, maybe one question where potentially you can be helpful in this. It's a question on how some of the EU legislation like EMFA, European Media Freedom Act, or Digital Service Act can be also a template for regulation in other countries. And so I was wondering very concretely, in Armenia, are you taking inspiration from any of these European regulations for the work on information integrity? Is there something we can learn from it? And then afterwards, I'm happy to ask that question to the whole round before we move to the Moroccan delegate.
Actually, the action plan and the concept against disinformation was elaborated mostly based on the European Commission's experience and positive experience so far. But at the moment, there are no further discussions on developing or adopting any further legislation to regulate anyhow the information sphere. So also because it's not the right moment to think about. Why? Because this is a pre-electory process in Armenia, and I think during the pre-election processes, it's really very hard to expect that the government, any government, can develop and adopt a favorable regulatory framework for the media. So in this regard, we would rather wait for elections take place next year, and then if everything goes well, after post-elections process, we can, of course, be back to this important topic. But it doesn't mean that we shall just wait doing nothing. This document is on the table. The government should take serious and active actions towards its full and complete realization.
Thank you very much. And also thank you very much for sharing very concrete examples of how you have used the OGP in Armenia to promote information integrity and media freedom, and sharing your recommendations addressed to all other countries. We will use that example as well for the report that we would like to develop on few ways forward and best practices. And in that case, a little reminder for everyone to please share your best practices through the survey that we shared. Et maintenant, j'aimerais bien passer la parole au Maroc.
Alors, en premier lieu, je voudrais tout simplement exposer notre paysage médiatique au Maroc et les réformes entreprises depuis un certain temps pour moderniser un peu le secteur de la presse et des médias. En premier lieu, vous savez, les choix du Maroc étaient depuis plusieurs années, c'est des choix portés pour l'édification d'une société ouverte, une société représentative de différentes composantes politiques, sociales et culturelles du pays. Dans ce cadre, bien sûr, le processus de l'édification de cette société a plusieurs fondements, parmi lesquels la liberté de la presse et des médias. Donc, je peux confirmer que notre volonté a été d'accompagner un peu à travers la mise en place d'un cadre réglementaire et des lois pour encourager la presse et les médias à mener le rôle qui leur incombe et qui est le rôle de l'information des citoyens, mais aussi le rôle de quatrième pouvoir. Donc, historiquement, les médias et la presse ont joué un rôle décisif dans la bataille pour la modernisation de notre société. Donc, le Maroc a connu, si on peut dire, l'édification ou bien l'édition de journaux depuis la fin du 19e siècle. Donc, nous pouvons dire que nous avons une tradition et une longue expérience en comparaison avec notre entourage africain et arabe. Depuis l'indépendance du pays, nous avons opté pour un code de liberté publique et de liberté d'expression qui a évolué au cours des années. Donc, la dernière réforme des lois de la presse remonte à 2016 et s'inscrivent dans le cadre d'une nouvelle constitution que le Royaume avait adoptée en 2011, mais aussi c'est une réforme qui s'est basée sur les principes universels et les engagements du Maroc dans le cadre, au niveau international, bien sûr, dans le cadre du suivi de l'évolution de la liberté de la presse et des médias. Déjà, dans la loi de 2016, on peut parler de grandes avancées pour renforcer les garanties pour une presse professionnelle, indépendante et multiple, telles que, par exemple, la suppression des peines privatives de la liberté et le remplacement par des peines modérées, de faire de la justice la seule autorité compétente en matière de réception des déclarations pour la création de journaux, par exemple, et le renforcement aussi des garanties de la liberté dans la pratique journalistique par l'instauration du droit d'accès à l'information et en prévoyant bien sûr des peines au cas d'abstention abusive, aussi par l'établissement de la protection judiciaire de la confidentialité des sources des journalistes et l'affirmation de l'obligation pour l'État de protéger les journalistes contre les agressions. En plus de ça, nous avons mis en place un système de soutien à la presse. C'est un système qui permet à la presse d'avoir des subventions publiques dans le cadre de leur mission, de mission publique. Ça veut dire que nous considérons au Maroc que la presse elle joue un rôle très important pour la démocratie. Donc, l'État a fait des choix, notamment pour appuyer et soutenir le travail de la presse en général. Donc, si on peut dire, ces réformes-là, ils ont fait que le paysage médiatique qu'on a aujourd'hui, c'est un paysage très diversifié, c'est un paysage où il y a beaucoup de médias. Donc, on a pratiquement un paysage qui est composé d'une presse papier, mais aussi une presse électronique. On a plus de 800 sites d'information et ces transformations qu'a connues la presse, surtout avec les nouvelles technologies, on permet à ce que voilà, on a une presse de proximité, une presse qui s'implante dans les régions et à travers tout le pays. Donc, déjà ça, c'est une bonne chose pour consolider, ou bien pour renforcer le rôle des médias dans les différentes régions du pays. Ceci dit, alors toutes ces réformes-là, avec bien sûr les nouvelles technologies et l'apparition, la prolifération de quelques phénomènes qu'on pourrait qualifier d'indésirables, comme les fake news et la désinformation. Donc, tous ces phénomènes-là, avec la complexité, bien sûr, du paysage médiatique, avec la régression du rôle de la presse traditionnelle, tout ça nous emmène à penser, ou bien à repenser à une refonte du paysage médiatique, et notamment à une révision des lois, des lois qui régissent le travail des médias en général. Donc, si on peut dire que dans cette approche-là, bien sûr que nous avons pris des engagements, notamment dans le cadre de l'initiative pour le gouvernement ouvert. Donc, notre engagement, c'est un peu d'approfondir notre expérience et de permettre au paysage médiatique en général du Maroc voilà, de faire face à des difficultés, notamment des difficultés qui sont liées, comme je viens de dire, à l'apparition surtout des nouveaux acteurs des médias comme sont les réseaux sociaux. Donc, on a un paysage médiatique, une presse qui souffre parce que elle n'est plus. Alors, la production d'informations n'est plus rentable. Donc, on est dans une logique de recherche d'un nouveau modèle pour les médias. Et dans ce cadre, comme je viens de dire, que notre engagement dans le cadre bien sûr, des plans de la promotion du gouvernement ouvert s'appuie sur un diagnostic approfondi mené par une commission provisoire qui représente les professionnels du média pour évaluer l'état actuel du secteur et faire un diagnostic qui puisse révéler les différentes problématiques auxquelles nous devons faire face. Donc, notre approche, elle est globalement, elle est basée sur une approche participative. Elle a été adoptée à travers des consultations avec les différents secteurs, les différents acteurs du secteur, notamment les organisations professionnelles et les représentants des médias. Donc, ces consultations ont pris la forme de rencontres et de journées d'études, bien sûr des tables rondes qui permettent d'enrichir le diagnostic et de formuler les propositions concrètes. Alors, les résultats attendus par ce processus sont bien inclut un cadre juridique modernisé. Donc, nous aspirons à moderniser le cadre juridique dans lequel travaillent les médias, mais aussi renforcer le rôle de l'entreprise de presse pour faire face, comme je viens de dire, aux défis auxquels qui sont maintenant qu'on connus, comme sont les défis liés aux nouvelles technologies. Donc, généralement, les actions, ils vont vers le renforcement de la transparence, de l'environnement médiatique, où les citoyens auront accès à une information de qualité, vérifiée et conforme aux normes déontologiques. Cette transparence elle est essentielle pour lutter contre les fake news et promouvoir une presse responsable. Mais aussi l'amélioration de la participation citoyenne aussi, à travers l'approche participative adoptée, qui inclut des consultations, comme je viens de dire, avec diverses parties prenantes, telles que les organisations professionnelles, les institutions nationales et les experts. En impliquant ces acteurs dans le processus décisionnel, les actions renforcent la participation citoyenne et permettent à la société civile de contribuer activement à la réforme du secteur médiatique. Bien sûr, nous aspirons à travers ces réformes-là de renforcer aussi l'autorégulation professionnelle et à travers le renforcement des mécanismes déontologiques prévus par des actions visant à responsabiliser les acteurs du secteur médiatique. Nous aspirons aussi au renforcement de l'accès à l'information parce que nous considérons que l'accès à l'information, il pourrait améliorer la qualité des contenus médiatiques et la structuration des entreprises de presse par la garantie d'un accès plus équitable à une information fiable et pertinente pour tous les citoyens. Donc, généralement, ce sont les grandes lignes des réformes entreprises par le Maroc pour renforcer le rôle des médias dans le cadre du processus du gouvernement ouvert. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Je ne sais pas si vous m'entendez.
Oui.
Merci beaucoup pour cet exposé très concret de comment vous avez utilisé le processus OGP pour une réforme sur les médias. We would like to maybe take 5 more minutes for questions and comments before we move on to the next steps. So I see Usama, one question, and otherwise, please do feel free to raise your hand or put questions in the chat. Usama, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Katarina. Hello, everyone. At first, I would like to warmly thank the OGP and the forum for beginning together these diverse groups, as well as for the essential work they are doing to support governance reforms worldwide. I also want to sincerely thank everyone for their very valuable contributions. Allow me to introduce myself. Osama Bouajila, representative of the North Africa Office of Reporters Without Borders. RSF is an international organization dedicated to defending press freedom and supporting journalists in their work. We are fully convinced of the challenges faced by press freedom and the right to information. And in this context, we are deeply committed to supporting countries involved in the Open Government Partnership process in implementing ambitious reforms, especially in the areas of the press freedom and access to information. As the North Africa office, we applaud Morocco's commitment to this process and confirm our full readiness to actively collaborate in supporting ongoing reforms, particularly those aimed at strengthening press freedom and protecting journalists. We would be delighted to continue this discussion and work together to advance these crucial reforms. Once again, thank you, OGP and the Forum, for this opportunity for dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Osama. And I think RSF is not the only organization around the table that is really open and willing to work with the different countries that would like to use the OGP process to promote media freedom and information integrity. And that was really the objective of today's meeting, to bring together these two communities, those that work on public sector reform since a long time and those that work on information integrity and media freedom for a long time, and be really happy to create more links between these different communities and use this process to advance media freedom. If there are no further questions, then I would like to give the floor back to Alessandro Bellantoni and to Camille Grenier for a couple of closing words of today's seminar. Yeah, maybe Alessandro, if you want to start.
Sure, with pleasure. Unfortunately, time passed by too quickly, as it often happens. I would have liked to have many more discussions. But first of all, I wanted to thank Armenia, Morocco, the UK, and all the others that intervened in this event. Clearly, as we can see, the ecosystem around media freedom, information integrity, journalism, and their role and its role in democracy is big. There are so many angles that can be tackled, and the OGP is a platform meant to sort of bridge all this complexity into a conversation that is mutually beneficial and that should lead towards reforms that are impactful and that are shared by both government and civil society, and inspired by the principles of open government, and hence in support of democracy. So I cannot imagine a better place where all these different streams could come to fruition. That is also why we are collaborating with the Forum. Their reports, their recommendations that are high level, that are global, can be easily, well, maybe not easily, but could be fruitfully translated into reforms at domestic level. And this can only be done if we put together all the different actors, those like us that work as platforms at global level, and those like you who work in government and civil society. So this is one of two events. So hopefully next one will be more practical. You can come back and share with us more about how we can make this happen. And clearly we are here to push both our organizations forward to help you, to engage with you, so that we can make some actions on the ground and increase traction for these important areas in your respective countries. So thank you, especially Caterina, for organizing this. Thank you to all the participants, and I hope this is just the beginning of a long collaboration. Camille.
Yes, thank you so much, Alessandro. Thanks, Katerina, and all the speakers. I don't have a lot to add to what Alessandro just said, but I think we also already replied to your question, Luke. The next session will be building on this first set of presentation, and really in the process of trying to move on not only with the definition of the problem or the definition of the vision, but really with the implementation. And I felt that specifically in this field of information integrity, we really need to move from defining the problem and having this sort of epistemological debate to how do we implement and adapt to different contexts and environments. Really convinced that this cooperation between the OGP and the Forum on Information Democracy can bring to concrete results, and will have also beside and beyond the next workshop on 20th March, we'll have other opportunities to keep working together and working with all our partners from around the world. So thanks so much for joining us and sharing best practices, and to fill in and reply to the survey so we get more data and inputs in this crucial discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for your great interventions, and we hope to see you at the next meeting as well as with other members of the OGP and media freedom community, and look forward to working together on how we can use this OGP initiative to promote media freedom and information integrity.